Hey everyone, this is John Puritz. Welcome to the Man Up Already podcast. This show is dedicated to each of us being better in all areas of our lives, mentally, spiritually, physically, and relationally. We want to help you be a better you because when you man up already, the world around you is greatly impacted. Here on the podcast, we don't believe you're an accident. We believe each of us is created for purpose, and this show is dedicated to helping you discover and live out that purpose. Again, welcome to the show, and let's check out another great episode. All right. Hey, welcome everyone to the Man Up Already podcast. And as always, super excited to have you here. Man, it's going to be an absolutely awesome show today. But before we get into the nuggets, our incredible guest, I want to remind everyone that on June 10th is the Man Up Already Growth Conference. And the closer we get to that event, the more stoked I get. It's going to be awesome. The speakers are unbelievable. The content's going to be awesome. If you are a man, get your butt there. It's in Port St. Lucie, Florida, June 10th, 9 a.m. to 2 p.m. And if you're a woman listener, kick your man in the ass and get him to that as well, because I promise you him coming out of there will just be at least a little bit better. It's going to be a killer event. Go to manupalready.com for tickets. They're $25, and it really is going to be a super awesome event. And if you can tell, if you're listening to this, right, you can't really see some changes, but if you're watching, which you can go to the Man Up Already YouTube channel, but we've got a brand new format, and it is, you could just see the growth of the podcast and the growth of the content. It's really super fun, and just getting better and better. And with that, we're going to bring up our guest, because she is a great example of just, growth and life and constantly moving forward and everything we stand for here on the podcast. Our guest is a successful CEO and entrepreneur, founder of the American Interns program, author of the books The End Game, and her latest, the book Clues. Please welcome our guest, Melissa Butterworth, or as she affectionately likes to put on her podcasting tags, Mel B.
Hey, John, it's so good to be here. How are you today?
I'm awesome. Super pumped to have you. And this just goes to show our commitment to growth, right? It's Memorial Day, and we're not shoving hamburgers and hot dogs at barbecues into our faces. We're doing stuff that just kind of grows the environment around us, which I love that we're doing it on this day, because and we didn't talk about this beforehand, but how significant a day like this is, right? Of just, kind of willing to sacrifice for a bigger idea, a bigger endeavor, right? Like being more. It's funny. Last night, our family watched Hacksaw Ridge. Have you ever seen that movie?
No.
Oh my gosh! All right, put that on your list, right? It's a little brutal from a war standpoint, but it really does speak to the power of commitment.
Oh wow! Yeah, no, I will. I'll have to watch that.
So happy Memorial Day!
Happy Memorial Day. This Man Up conference, like I kind of want to come. I feel like I need to put on like a wig and maybe a hat and show up as a man.
Well, hey, we won't turn anybody away.
I think it's wonderful. I'm so excited.
Yeah, we're pumped for it. It's going to be awesome. So you and I connected actually through my daughter, but then we connected on LinkedIn and have kind of grown community there as well. I'm honored to have you here. And I'm diving into your book, which is I'm super excited for. So talk a little bit about you. Do you like Mel or do you like Melissa? What do you like to go by?
Mel B is great. Like the Spice Girl.
I was a big Spice Girls fan. So not Man Up, but
Butterworth, Mrs. Butterworth. I mean, everybody's had Mrs. Butterworth syrup, so whichever works for you, I'm happy.
That's funny. So you, where did you grow up? You, Virginia, is that right?
Yeah. I'm actually from a farm in Harrisonburg, Virginia, and grew up just a farm life, with horses and cows and cats, and it was a very different lifestyle than I'm leading now. That's for sure. But both of my parents were school teachers.
Wow.
And so, and one of the things that I still have to like pinch myself because it's almost hard to believe, but my parents, because they taught school and they were very, very devoted to what they did, they had a Mennonite, which is kind of like the Amish. I don't know if you've ever heard of Mennonite, but they had a Mennonite take care of my brother and I quite a bit. So I was exposed to both the farm life, but then also kind of the Mennonite culture and heritage. So there's a lot of great things that I learned from that. And I feel very fortunate to have had that upbringing.
And that, I mean, Mennonite, society and ideas, I mean, is incredibly strict, right?
It is. It is. We, we didn't really follow all of those guidelines when she was there. We did
That's what I would imagine that influence had come out at some point.
Yes, no, absolutely. You don't watch television. There's no real electricity. She came to see us with a horse and a buggy. And so I'm talking like just completely different than I think most people would have been raised. So yeah, it was quite the experience.
So how did you end up in Florida?
So I grew up, John, with my brother playing competitive tennis. And so my parents got us very involved with tennis academy. And one of the biggest tennis academies was in Florida. So we used to visit Florida quite a bit with all of our tennis tournaments and then the tennis academy that our parents sent us to. And so I just always really, really liked Florida. And I call it somewhat of a clue, which we'll talk about in a little bit when we get a little deeper into my book Clues. But I just always felt like Florida would eventually be my home. I don't know if it was the ocean or if it was my instincts, but it was something about Florida I just really always loved.
It's funny because I'm sitting here listening to you and I had grown up coming down here as well. And, I don't know if this was for you, but for me, the number one motivator was cold.
Yes. Yes. Oh my gosh. Right. Yeah. It was always so beautiful in Florida.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
And you always go, gosh, wonder what it would like to be like living right where it's always sunny. And I joke, we've been here for November will be 20 years, and the novelty of living here has not worn off at all. Like I still just absolutely love Florida, and it's amazing to see what Florida has grown into. At least from my perspective, over the last 20 years, it's pretty incredible what's happening in this state.
It is. It's incredible. I love it. Yeah. I love it, and it's been my home for quite some time. So absolutely.
So. You started you're a business owner, right? You're a CEO, you're in the medical field. So I want to talk about, kind of this idea, because there's so many people out there that, it's funny that you talk about your parents being teachers. I was a public school teacher for 10 years thinking, okay, this is where I went to school. This is kind of what I am, right? How many people out there define their existence by what they do versus really, kind of who they are. How did your career, happen? And then you've made a shift as well as life has gone on. So I kind of want to talk about, that I think the shift is so important, but talk a little bit about, kind of what you do and how the business kind of developed.
Sure. So, you can relate with this then having been a school teacher. So I watched my parents like truly live their purpose and their passion, which was teaching. Right. And I also watch them struggle financially, like really, really hard. And I said to myself when I was growing up, wow, like I don't want to struggle. I don't want to have to worry about, about paying the mortgage or paying the rent. I don't want to have to worry about all of the things that I saw my parents struggling with. And at some point, I guess I was probably in middle school or maybe going into high school, both of my parents made a significant career change. My mother went to go into computer sales, and she met a young man by the name of Michael Dell from Dell Computer Corporation. And she ended up going to work with him, which was a life-changing event for her. And it was also a life-changing event for me to see my mom go through that massive transition. And then my father also made a life-altering decision, which was to leave teaching, even though it was his passion. And he went to go work himself all the way to the top of a company called Johnson and Higgins. He ended up becoming their like senior vice president. And so I watched both of my parents go from living their purpose, struggling financially. I'm in high school. I'm freshman, sophomore, junior year. I'm watching both of them rise to the top of their careers and in different industries, right? And I made the conscious decision that I am not going to struggle like my parents struggled. I am going to go out there and I'm going to make something of myself so that I don't have to worry about the things that I saw them worrying about. And so that's what really led me into having my mom as my main mentor. I watched her make a fortune in sales. And I just so happens that because she was my mentor and she actually tried to get me to go work for Michael Dell, I could have had my whole future lined up for me, but I had some fairly significant, what I call clues and or life events that happened in my childhood, that happened in college, that really led me towards choosing a career in the medical field, which I did. I chose to go into pharmaceutical and then eventually laboratory diagnostic sales. And so that's how I ended up consciously making the decision that I wanted to have a better life for myself. So I took the traditional, and you talk about this in your book. I love your book, by the way. Your book,
Thank you.
Man Up, is so fantastic. I absolutely love it. And you talk about how we are like put into this box in society, a box in society, right? Where, checklist, you got an education, checklist, you got married, checklist, you had the kids, you got a corporate job. Well, I went and got a corporate job, and I really thought that was kind of the only way to go, right? I never thought that being an entrepreneur would be the avenue that I would take. But anyway, so I went to go work, and I talk about it in my book, Clues, for one of the largest diagnostic labs in the world, and was making a very strong 6 figures. I even got it up to 7 figures towards the end of my career with them. I was their number one producer, and I was fired. I was fired at 34 years old, and it's just another clue, right? I mean, I call life events clues, and that was just God's way or the universe's way of throwing out a clue that maybe there's something even bigger and better out there for me. And it was really the key for me making the decision to go into having my own company.
Okay, there's so much in here I want to unpack. I love it. So first, let's give a shout out to mom and dad, right? I know what that moment is like when it's okay, this isn't working and we shift. I don't know all the ins and outs of their story, but for any teachers listening, I say this, Mel, constantly. Teachers do not understand their value in the marketplace, right? Like when you're a teacher, you go to school for being a teacher, you come out, you go into public school teaching, and your value is kind of dictated to you until you step out and recognize the skills that teachers bring to the table are worth 6 figures out there in the marketplace. It's just teachers are easily and you're in the corporate world as well now as the business owner. So, I think the skills teachers bring to the table every day equal 4 to 5 people in corporate America.
1,000%. I mean, I watched both of my parents become self-made millionaires with their skills. And so they went from making, they're teaching like within 2 years, making 6 figures. And then both of them like retired young and became like your millionaire next door, story. So absolutely.
Yeah, and just in pulling some things out of there, I think I really used to think, well, because I was guilty of saying this, I literally said this in front of a classroom. I'm not going to make big money in my life. I'm a teacher, right? Like that was the mindset, because
Wow.
when you're in the employee quadrant, right, of the cash flow quadrant, your wage is dictated by somebody else. So that's where you derive your value, unfortunately, right? That's kind of how that system works. But it wasn't until getting out that I realized that you can have passion, you can have purpose, and you can have compensation along with it.
Absolutely. Absolutely. The real battle's a battle in your mind, right? It has nothing to do with, I always say this to people: the fact that you think job security is whether it's teaching or whether it's corporate America, that's a joke. I mean, I was their number one producer out of, it was like 20,000 sales reps. Like, I was their number one producer and I got fired. So it's a fallacy that being in corporate America is safe. It's, it's the, easy way to go. It's job security. No, it's none of the above at all.
Yeah. And I mean, we could go 2 hours just on what we were going to talk about and this one concept, which is, if you're going to make a bet in life, if you're going to bet your future on anything, freaking bet on yourself rather than the security of somebody else's decision on whether or not you should stay. You know what I mean? Like, it's just, I'm so passionate about that because I watched my dad, and I wrote about him in my book, but my dad passed away young. He was 63. I watched my dad get thrown away by corporate America at 50, and he was never the same. Now, he lived more post corporate America trying to build his own business, but he went bankrupt. He just didn't know business. And I think the stress of that is ultimately what killed him. But you watch, so many people put their lives and faith into something that is that's not control. I really do believe, and you had said it before, and we could call it right. I think God equips us with the ability to provide for ourselves. I think we're wired for independence. We're wired for freedom. We're wired for entrepreneurship. All those tools are inside of us. And this is a good segue, right? Give me props for this, because life leaves clues on how to make that happen, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I'm sorry you had to go through that. But I do think that, like, your dad paved that pathway so that the next generation, you could jump in and like kind of take it from there and just take it to a whole new level. That's kind of what I believe.
Yeah. The adversity, it's funny, right? Because the adversity our parents go through really does give us lessons, right? If we're paying attention of what we don't want to see happen, right? You and I have both experienced it. And I'll just share this story because I have to give credit where credit is due. And it'll give people a good glimpse into a mindset, right? And one of the reasons why I do the podcast is I want people to understand that we can change. I personally was not the person that thinks the way I do today 25 years ago. It wasn't until my wife left teaching and got a job outside of teaching that I watched her make more money. Wow. That was the clue for me to go, maybe I don't have to do this for the rest of my life. If she didn't do that, and I fought her. I mean, you want to talk about not manning up? I was so insecure and so afraid that I literally said, what are you doing to our family? Why don't you just go back into teaching? It's secure. Like, that came out of my mouth.
Wow. That's huge.
Huge, right? So proof also that men need we need women in our life. And that's a whole other rabbit trail of why maleness is important and feminine is important and what they do together and why they need each other. That's a whole other platform here. But she was the one who did it first. And that was my first, like, oh crap, maybe things can be different. So
that's a major clue. She was a major clue in your life. That's how I see it. Yes, absolutely.
All right. So let's talk about, you call them clues, right? People refer to them in many different things, but I love that concept because I've just never heard of that, but put in that way. So how did that come up for you? And then ultimately, what was the impetus to write the book?
So, I was sitting in the middle of my living room in 2020 when I turned the big 50 and COVID hit, right? COVID hit. And I think we all go through, I don't know, maybe it's like major revelations at different points in our life. And this was one of those like major wake up calls for me, because I was sitting in my living room in the middle of COVID. I was eating pizza and I was drinking like wine every night. And I was doing all the things that I think a lot of America was doing. And I was I was basically like eating away and drinking away my feelings. And I, for the first time in my life, put on weight. I'm usually super, super thin. And so I was sitting in the middle of the living room. I was feeling pathetic for myself. And what do we do when we're feeling bad for ourselves? We either eat more, or we drink more, or we like go to some sort of like shopping addiction or whatever type of addiction you might have. And for me, it was one of my like addictions is car shopping. Like I'm a car freak. So what do? I'm feeling depressed and I go out to buy myself a new Rolls Royce, which in itself is another whole like pathetic lesson because I was feeling sad for myself. So what do? I go out to buy a new Rolls Royce, which is, it was really pathetic, right? So when I look back at that now, and you'll understand why in a minute. So I pull up to the car dealership and I have on my license plate, it says Jaja, which is my nickname. And the car dealer who I've known for a couple of years runs out and he goes, Melissa, I never knew that, your name's really Jaja. I said, no, that's my nickname. And he goes, would you please come into the dealership? My daughter's in here. Her name is Jaja and I want you to meet her. So I went in, I met Jaja, who's also featured in my book Clues at this point. And I started talking to her and she said, do you know how many women come into this dealership that can like walk out with any car that they want that pays for it themselves? She goes, I've only met one and that's you. She said, the majority of women come in here with men that are buying them the car. And she goes, I want to be you when I grow up. She goes, will you come and speak to my entrepreneurship class at high school? And I said, you won't believe this. I've been writing a book and I'm catering it towards, I think I'm going to cater it towards both women and men that are, high school to college, maybe like in their 30s, because I feel like they just don't have enough mentorship and people in their life other than their parents that can really help guide them. And she said, you've got to come talk to my class. And I was like, oh my God. So anyway, fast forward, I went and spoke to her class and I ended up conducting 2 contests at her school. And through those contests came basically the whole idea of a treasure hunt theme. Carly Burr, who's featured in my book, came up with the treasure hunt theme. And she subsequently won a contest that I put on and she helped me write the book. She's featured in my book. And then another young lady by the name of Sabrina Reback was the winner of another contest that I conducted, which was a life purpose contest. So through that whole experience, we came up with the whole name of Clues. And what Clues really means is we're all going through life and we're searching for something greater. We're searching for, what our ultimate purpose is. At least I hope that people are aware. I say that, but in reality, only 25% of the 8 billion population really have a clue as to what their purpose is, which means there are 6 billion people that don't have a clue as to what their purpose is. So I thought, wow, what a great theme to talk about clues, because as I was writing the book and going back and looking at like all of my life events, I realized that along my path to finding my own purpose, there were people that came into my life. There were life situations that happened in my life. There were events which were like recurring themes that like kept coming up. Like for me, it was medical related occurring themes that kept coming up. And for you, it was one of those clues was your wife, right? Who had to kind of go out and take a different, job for you to be able to wake up and realize maybe what your ultimate calling and what your purpose is. So that's the essence of what Clues is all about. Is it's a proven process that helps people uncover what their purpose is, but it's also incorporated with a theme of a treasure hunt theme and with clues within your own life and different exercises to be able to help the reader to really ascertain what their own life purpose is.
And there's, as we go on the journey, and I also, right, 2020 was turning 50, which was an interesting time to turn 50, right? You're expecting like, hey, wow, this is a big milestone, and you're kind of locked in, but
it sure was.
But a lot of self reflection, healing, growth can happen out of that adversity, right? So running theme, that part of those clues is, I think when you're facing resistance, I've heard this before, a big clue is when you're when you're facing resistance, it's the universe telling you that something needs to change, right? And so often we want to drown it out with alcohol or eat or do or whatever, right? Check out, ignore it. But resistance is there, pain is there to tell you that something is wrong and it needs addressing. And the entire concept of manning up is when you face that moment, man up is like deal with it, right? like go in, look at the clues. Like it's so funny, right? Like when and I'm learning so much just in putting on this event. But with men, not to go down this rabbit hole, but I do see this, it doesn't need to take the house on fire, God bless you, the house on fire or the spouse walking out the door for us to go, all right, something is wrong. There are crap loads of clues that have shown up prior to that event happening. We just got to start paying attention, right? And we can talk about this a little bit because I'd love to know your thoughts. Have you ever read the book Outwitting the Devil?
No.
Okay, that's another one for you. And I'm going to talk about this at the conference. There is this concept of drifting, and basically the devil in the book says that if I can get you to drift, you're not going to fulfill your major purpose, which is right. Us fulfilling our God-given purpose, right? Can't think of the word, but it is in direct opposition
of the devil. Yes,
of the devil. We're all created for a purpose, right? And so anyway, let's talk about kind of what you see. Maybe with women, especially young women. I love the fact that you and I are kind of on the same path. Or the same mission, right? We're just tackling two different genders, but you're working with young women. Just kind of your thoughts on adversity, what's changed today versus maybe when we were growing up. I think it's harder with all social media and things in young people's face, but I'm kind of throwing a lot at you, but I'd love to know your thoughts.
No, and I'm going to comment on something that you said because you're absolutely right. When I read your book, I'm like, oh my God, like your mission is very similar to mine, but it's with men, right? And the reason you'll find this ironic because the reason I decided to cater my book towards women, because initially I was going to do it for men and women, was because when I went and conducted that contest at that high school, out of like 2,000 students, only like maybe 180 people entered the contest. And there was like a $10,000 prize for the contest. They were going to be featured on the back of the book, in the book. I mean, you talk about, and then to be subject to be able to have a paid internship. And of all of those students, only one person was a male. And the reason I think that only one male entered the contest was because they weren't willing to do the introspective work, which is what you talk about in your book. They weren't willing to go deep. They weren't willing to do the introspective work that it took to be able to figure out what their purpose was, right? I mean, God forbid they had to write out 50 life events and go through and see if there's any themes in those events and see if there's any reoccurring facts. So I was really discouraged with the fact that I found that, because I feel like men aren't doing enough, like even at a younger age. I don't know if it's a maturity level difference or what it is, but it was shocking. It was an awakening for me.
Well, if there's one thing I've learned on this journey is number one, men need men to lead them out. If they're going to do the work, it's not going to come. It very rarely comes, maybe older. And I know that there are, and I so don't want to step in a bear trap here, not necessarily with you, but listeners, there are a lot of women that coach men. Right. And that there's I just know that the God work, the real deep masculine work, a man needs to reach in and pull that out from another man.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
The deep stuff. I'm not talking about business and processes and all that other stuff, but the deep emotional shit, that is the divine order of things, right? It just is, right? I know that my influence as an example, as a father on my son, is radically different than my influence as a father on my daughter. That's just, that's the difference between masculine and feminine. And the work I do with Ethan is very different than the work I do with Sophia. And I watch Sophia go to my wife for things that only can happen between mothers and daughters.
Yes,
only
absolutely.
can happen, right, with women versus, it's just the work that you do with women is radically different than if a man was doing it.
1,000%, 1,000%. I didn't mean to go off on that tangent. I just thought
this is the whole podcast, right? Like this it's all relevant. It's all relevant.
No, so I'm really happy to see what you're doing, because I feel like, I mean, just starting with, why wouldn't these kids want to be exposed to, super successful entrepreneurs and win big cash prizes and have this on their resume for their future and for, and be featured in a book? It blew my mind. It really blew my mind.
Yeah. Yeah. There's, and not to go on this tangent, but I think just because for our listeners, it's interesting to see men, especially young men today, in what has shifted. And you really do. I would highly recommend Outwitting the Devil, because what he's talking about in there is playing out in our society today. If inside every man is this question, do I have what it takes? And for me, growing up in my teens and my 20s, the answer was, the answer that comes back from society typically is no, which is why you need somebody as a man to help you through that. But I think today, I mean, look, gosh, not to get on this tangent, right? But it's just, we're in this moment of conversation. Look what's happening with retailers and what they're, I mean, I have to say, because I just saw it, like tuck underwear. I mean, are you kidding? Right? Like this crap that, I mean, then the messaging to men is, and think about that. Literally, it's hide it away. And we're going to celebrate that. Like that is so detrimental to what you and I are after from a male and female perspective.
No, absolutely. Absolutely. Could not agree with you more.
It's anyway, so not to go there, but it is part of why aren't people more successful living out their purpose, and why it's so important for people like you out there writing, speaking, coaching, mentoring, and what this movement is all about.
Absolutely.
So, so what happened after you did the event at the school, which I think is awesome, that you're now post COVID, kind of bring us up to today. You're still in your medical field.
Yes.
Right?
Yes. I actually own a company called Advanced Strategic Partners. We were just awarded last year the #1 brokerage firm in the country for medical mergers and acquisitions. So awesome. Also thank you. One of the most significant things that happened as well last year is that it was another clue for me, was that my mentor, Gary Huff, who was the CEO for LabCorp, has since joined my firm as well. And we are colleagues and partners, which is unbelievable. Like, he's been my mentor in this industry for 26 years. I also had another gentleman by the name of Rick Cooper, who is extremely well known in our space. He also joined our firm. So I just feel honored to have a very successful, thriving company. And so after kind of reaching that milestone and then writing my second book, which was Clues, which is what we're talking about here today, I've also started a not-for-profit called the American Interns, and it allows the reader to be able to go to my website. It allows them to be able to be exposed to other women. I've got 12 women that are also, their stories are also in the book. It allows them to enter contests and be exposed to these women and get paid internships. So it's really my way of giving back and being able to, to really look at making an impact on future generations. I mean, that's really what my ultimate goal is.
I love it. I love it. I was sitting here thinking, what would you, because we come from the same, we're Gen X, and I think I shared this when we first met, right? Gen X has a unique perspective because we were often left to our own devices without technology, right? Like our generation in our youth had to figure it out, period, right? Like parents are working, so you might come home necessarily to, an empty home for a little while because parents were working, but you couldn't hop on the internet, or you went outside to play. You had to be home, before dark, all that responsibility. And I think that shaped us. And our generation is pretty interesting because technology came at a pace in which we could absorb it.
Correct.
Right. Where today it's just you're bombarded with it.
Correct.
But as now Gen X that we are, what do you see the difference, Mel, in the younger generation, and what do you think they need that we didn't have to get to the next level? I know we didn't talk about that, but I'm just curious. It's just kind of a question that came to mind.
Yeah, no, I see that the younger generation is hiding behind their iPhones and hiding behind the computer screens, and they're all on Instagram and TikTok, and they're all on, every single device that's out there, and they're hiding behind their phones. They're not present. They're not here. They're not living in the moment, right? And I see that as a big distraction. And I think what kids are missing, in my own humble opinion, is leadership and mentorship, which is why I've started the American Interns. And I think that that they really, they need to start waking up and learning to live in the present. I have recognized that they're not motivated by money at all.
Right.
Like, I don't know if it's because they don't care, or their parents have given them everything, or, and I see that so many of them are kind of drifting, and it might be because of COVID but I don't know. I feel like that they just need more mentorship, more leadership. Though technology is, and it can be a great thing. I met you through LinkedIn. I met your daughter through LinkedIn. I think it can be a great thing, and you can meet a lot of people, but I also think it could be a great distraction as well.
Oh, 100%. It's funny. One of the things I'm going to talk about at the conference is, to men especially, is how social media is destroying relationships, which is interesting, right? This social thing is actually destroying some of our key relationships. But it is interesting what you share from a drive standpoint. It's not about maybe the things that we chased after. But I think the opportunity to live a more fulfilled, purpose-driven life is there. I mean, look, you and I both know technology does allow us to do. I mean, things like this are a perfect example. We can express ourselves more. We can chase our purpose and our passion more, and get compensated for it in a faster fashion than maybe you could a while back. But there are pitfalls in there as well that we didn't have to deal with.
No, absolutely. Absolutely. I think about it. If I had all this technology and combine that with my ability to go out there and develop relationships and really generate sales, which is what, to me, any company lives or dies off the sales, right? And, somebody's not going to entrust me to sell their corporation by seeing an ad on Facebook or Instagram. It may be a part of the puzzle, right? It may be a part of the whole picture that, they're going to check out my website, or they're going to see that I'm real and that I've got background. They may be a part of the puzzle, but ultimately, I think about what you and I could have done and what we are doing with our businesses at the current state. But so I think the sky's the limit for these kids. I really do. I think they've got a lot more opportunity than we ever did, in my opinion.
And you touched on something that I'd love to hear more about, because I would imagine this is a key component to your success. And I see it on things like LinkedIn. And in our time right now, just in this moment of history, watching the rise of automation, of AI, and this is kind of this soapbox that I'm on in the conversation of transparency and authenticity and being real. Mel, how important is the fundamental of building relationships? How important is that in life, in business, et cetera?
If you were to ask me, what's the number one thing that got you to be 7 figures and 8 figure, in this lifetime? It's 1,000% my relationships. And I've developed relationships now for, since this is the same people that I was in college with. There was a handful of those individuals. I'm a firm believer that, school's important more for the relationships and the people that you meet and the relationships that you develop. But I've got relationships that go way back 25 years I'm still doing business with today. My lifelong mentor was Gary Huff, and he ended up being the CEO of the largest lab in the world. And now we're colleagues and business partners. And so I've just developed long-term relationships where I genuinely care about them. I genuinely care about their families. I keep in touch with them. I send them Christmas cards every year. I go the extra mile, not because I want anything from them, but because I genuinely care. And that comes through after 25 years of knowing a lot of people. And if you're going to go into a field, or, my area of expertise is the medical field, more specifically the lab field, it's a very small industry where everybody knows everybody. And so those relationships they mean everything. So if you're going to build a business, if you're going to get out there and, sell your services, whether they're, financial planning services or life insurance, we're all trying to sell something, right? I mean, and we buy from people that we trust and that we built relationships with. And so I think that's key. And I very rarely have I, only once, actually just recently, have I made a pretty major investment off of somebody that I met through social media. But, let's see how it turns out for me. But it was really fun.
Well, and that is I teach it constantly. When I was mentoring people to be in business, I'm screaming it from the rooftops right now on LinkedIn, because the automation on there is something has changed on LinkedIn post-COVID, that everybody thinks that the way to connect is to just through automation, which, there's one thing to connect with people. It's another thing when you're engaging with them to actually, speak, right? Be a real person. But I think that fundamental of like people skills and how to win friends and influence people, and how important, those resources are. In the end, life is all about relationships, right? And I talk about in the book, The Power of Your Posse. And so many people, I'd love to know your thoughts on this, and it's funny, I had somebody say this to me one time, and she said, and I've watched her struggle most of her life in the time that I've known her as an adult, if I'm not at the mental level of the people I want to be around, why would they spend time with me? How can I put them in my circle if I see them as here and I see me as here? Right. So for me, in the end, everything comes down to self-concept. But what would you say to somebody who said that?
I think by the way, I loved your chapter, because I thought you were going to end the book, but then you jumped in and said, oh, let me talk about the power of your posse, because that was like the last thing that you concluded with, if I recall.
Yep.
I would say this. I mean, I talk a lot in my book about the power of self-confidence, and I talk about how to develop self-confidence. That's really key. I also talk about the power of a mastermind, and how critical it is that you surround yourself with people that are either at your level and or much greater than your level. And the way I have been successful at doing that is not only through my self-confidence, but also through, I look at them, I look at what they do, and I say, how can I add value in their life? What is it that I bring to the table that maybe I can do to help this individual? And a perfect example is, right now I met somebody on LinkedIn who I just think she is the bomb. And I've been looking for friends that are at my level or greater. And just based on the fact that I can see she recently sold her company for $250 million. I can see it's her second company. And I'm like, wow. Oh, wow. She lives in the same area. I realized she's a Miami girl, and she lives in the same area. And so I kept thinking to myself, how can I add significant value? And this individual happens to own a ton of companies. And I said, well, maybe I can invest in one of her companies, which I did recently. I invested in one of her companies. And I also, I thought, how else can I be of value? And I thought, well, I know a lot of really wealthy people in the medical field, and one of the products that she's a CEO of fits into the medical field. So, maybe I'm not as successful as her, but this is how I can be of service to her. And so I start looking at that with everybody that I know, everybody that I want to, potentially get into their circle. It's really looking at the value that I can bring to that individual.
There's so many wonderful nuggets, right? That's my yours is clues. To me, it's nuggets. There's so many wonderful nuggets in what you just said. One is people are people. Doesn't matter what somebody does, doesn't matter how much somebody makes. We all are people. Relationships apply across the board. right? Of how can we respect and trust people who add value to our lives, and we to them, right? That's the key. And that glue in relationships is of an exchange of value, not monetary, right? The essence of what it means to be a human being.
Correct.
I love that. I love that.
Correct.
The other thing that I just pulled out is there's always another level, right? Like some people would go, well, Mel, she's here. She makes this kind of income. I'm over here. Gosh, I wish I could get there. We're all trying to grow and get better every single, well, that would be the point, right? Grow, get better. There's always another level. There's another level income wise. There's another level, relationship wise, personal growth wise. There's always another level.
You bring up a great point. I mean, that's really key. And I would, from an advice perspective, would say, because look, I've been dirt poor, came from a farm, right? I mean, saw my parents, and by the time I was 30, I was a self-made millionaire. I talk about it in my book, not to impress anybody, but to impress upon them. But look, if a farm girl who had nothing, who, and I had some pretty tragic medical issues that I talk about in my book. And, so I had a lot of anxiety and a lot of fear and a lot of self-doubt. And, I had all kinds of struggles growing up, like a lot of people have had, right? So if I could do that and then lose it all by the time I'm 34 and then regain it within 7 years much quicker. And one of the key ways that I've done that is I've had people in my life that were much more successful, whether it's, from a God, spirituality, faith perspective. I've always had somebody over here that's much greater than me that I've learned from, whether it's from a financial perspective. I've always had somebody over here that's much greater, or in the medical field. I've developed friends that are much smarter than me, medically speaking, that have the technical expertise that I don't. So I think that is so key. If these kids would stop getting out and just, behind the thing and maybe send one of them, hey, let's have a coffee date. Hey, and I've had that. I've had a lot of people reach out to me that says, hey, Miss Butterworth, let's have a coffee date, or hey, and I'll do that. If I see that somebody wants to learn and I feel like they're genuine, then I'm willing to do that. So anyway, that's not to go off on that tangent, but I think that's really, really key.
Well, you just said something that I think is so key, and that is, and I think you can really see it with people. Successful people in life, right? In life and business, right? Have strong I think strong self-concept leads to success in life. And somebody who, in my book, I talk about humility and all these things I call the pillars, but somebody who's there wants to share with someone, because we see ourselves in the past going through that same process, and we know what it takes and want to get back, because we didn't get to where we are without somebody doing the same thing. And the idea of, well, why would they invest time with me? Find out where the value is. This all connects, because if you bring value, right? If you take interest, if you care about people, successful people want to share those nuggets to help others get to where they were.
1,000%. Everybody wants to feel like what they've been through. They want to be able to feel like they can tell their story to somebody. And so you're 100% right.
I love that. I love that. I love that. I love that. So we could go a long, long time, but I like to keep the podcast within an hour. So I'm going to put up there's another new feature of the podcast, which I'm stoked about, because then I don't forget. I would love to ask you this question. What are the top 3 books that have had the biggest impact on you?
I would say number 1 is Think and Grow Rich by Napoleon Hill.
Yeah.
And I've read that book at least 30 plus times. I would say that I would say my book Clues, and the reason is because I had 12 different authors in this book, and 12 different women that, including the interns that work with me, that have had significant impact on my life, actually helped me create the American Interns. So 100%, that even though the book was authored by me, it was also co-authored by a lot of these other women. And I would say that I would say that the third would be The Execution Factor by Kim Perrell, who's also one of my, she's a business associate of mine and a mentor for me. And her book talks all about you can have a great idea for your business, but unless you get out there and execute and do these specific things, that it's never going to be likely that you're going to be as successful as you can be.
Wow, I love it. Never heard of it. So this is why I asked the question, right? It's my cheat way of learning what books to read.
And by the way, I'm not trying to get brownie points. I love your book, and I think your book, I put your book on my pillowcase so that my boyfriend would see it. And he saw it and he's like, well, what's this? And I'm like, oh, it's just very interesting. I just read it. And he goes, well, it says man up already. And I said, yeah. I said, I can put a strap on too every now and then, Hey. Of course, I'm kidding, but anyway. So yeah, I'm hoping that he'll read it. But your book is excellent.
No, thank you. I appreciate that. And then the other question I have for you, really for the audience, is I think you're awesome. I think you bring so much to the table. So what's the best way for people to find you and connect with you?
Sure. I think if anybody's interested in getting a potential internship and or for their daughters, I would say go to theamericaninterns.com. So it's the American Interns with an S.com or LinkedIn. I'm on under as Melissa C. Butterworth. And of course, through you, if you have anybody that would like a free copy of my book, I'm happy to send you the electronic version and you can provide it to them. I know that your network is a lot of men, but I'm sure they have daughters and maybe their daughters could benefit. And by the way, just because this was written for women does not mean that men cannot get cannot apply the same principles. As a matter of fact, I've had 2 men recently send me specific notes saying how this book has changed their life, especially when it comes to the power of positive thinking and the power of gratitude. I think a lot of people really like that, and as well as the whole identifying with clues in their life. So I think this can have a tremendous impact. So I'll give you a free copy of that, and you can provide that to your listeners and to your network.
Well, I appreciate that. And you're so true. I mean, Man Up already isn't, it's geared towards men, but you and I both, when we met, talked about this. Success principles are success principles. They apply across the board, right? We're just talking to a specific audience, but they do the book. I'm reading your book and I'm learning as I go as well. So I think it applies both ways for sure. Well, all right. So that is our time. Mel, thank you so much for being a guest. I'm super honored to connect with you, know you, interact with you, be in that posse with you. It's just exciting to watch what you're doing. And I really appreciate you being here.
Thank you. Likewise. I might crash your June 10th meeting. Woohoo!
That's awesome.
Thank you, John.
Thank you.
All right, bye.